Yeah.
The letter is very pretentious and begins like this. Hello, Leslie. Again, I did not know Leslie. I maybe had spoken to her twice. So I was going to give her this letter that began, Hello, Leslie. How is your day today? Mine's quite well, I must admit. I do hope that your day is a good one because what you're about to read may or may not add an extra color to the rainbow at day's end. So I was trying very
I'd
hard
say
to
yes.
impress this person.
That's beautiful, David. That and much, much more on this episode of The Pod Spotter. Folks, you're listening to the Pod Spotter. I'm your host, Zack. There are just a shitload of pods out there right now to weed through, and that's why we're here. We're going to help you with the heavy lifting. We're going to find those little diamonds in the rough. Every Monday, we're going to talk to the hosts and the creators of those podcasts, and we're going to learn about them and play clips. And hopefully it's entertaining and you guys enjoy it, and you subscribe to our little pod and visit us at thepodspotter.com and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and at thepodspotter for extra content and information on upcoming episodes. Thanks, everybody. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's really a pleasure. I've been screening hundreds of podcasts. Pod people, we all have that box in our parents' basement filled with old yearbooks and trophies and love letters from a different time and in many ways a different person, a record of who we were before we became the people we are today. Our guests today have taken that box and they've dumped it out and they've sifted through it and they've found the key moments of vulnerability and they now broadcast them for all the world to see. The Mortified podcast features adults sharing the embarrassing artifacts they've held onto since their youth. Creators Neil Ketcher and Dave Nadelberg join me today to discuss the business of snooping through diaries publicly. Welcome, gentlemen. Dave, Neil, how are you? Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Were either of you big snoops as kids? I just want to start there. Did you have siblings that you could snoop, or parents? Were you big snoops?
I'll answer that because there's a fun fact about the title of Mortified that relates to this, which is I used to snoop in my older sister's diary when she went off to college. And what stopped me, and there was nothing really that interesting, but what stopped me was her name is Debbie, and she wrote this entry that was actually about concern for me. And so I was such an asshole for doing it.
Oh my God.
And one of the original titles for Mortified, there was a bunch, but one of them was Debbie's Diaries. And if you look closely at our logo, our new logo, which just launched, a few weeks ago as of this recording, or a week ago as of this recording,
the book.
There's a diary in the new logo. And if you look very closely, our graphic designer, unbeknownst to me, I guess I had told him this story, and he, Morley, put this in the artwork.
Oh my God, the little Easter egg. I love it. Do you remember the character adjustment she wanted? Because are you sure it wasn't a plant? Are you sure she didn't know you were
snooping? It wasn't a character
snooping?
adjustment. I'm not an actor. I'm not a role in a play. She was telling me she was like worried about, I don't know. I was probably depressed or something.
Oh, okay. It was broad. It was a general, Dave, I'm worried about Dave. Are you sure she didn't know you were snooping and just put it in as a plant to get you to stop?
She is smart. That's true. It's possible.
Well, at any rate,
did you snoop in your older sister's stuff, Neil?
Yep. But I was only looking for entries about myself, and my sister was very verbose in her journals, and I was just like flipping through journal after journal, like through just like seas of text, just looking for any reference to me. And I think the only thing I found was her concern for me as well. So it was like really annoying because I was hoping to find something better, but I'm not sure what I was hoping to find.
We both have wonderful older sisters that are just concerned for your welfare and well-being. I didn't find, and I have two older sisters and they didn't give a shit about, there is nothing in there about poor Zack. But similarly, Dave, I did have a stop now experience of snooping when I was a pretty big snoop, went through a big snoop phase. And then I found the box in my parents' bedroom that no child is ever supposed to find. You know that box.
Oh, I found that box.
You found
Mine
that
was a drawer.
Never snooped again never snooped a day in my life. Of course.
I found a turkey baster that wasn't, it turns out, a turkey baster.
What do you mean?
No.
Wait, what?
I don't know.
Your mind just saw it and was like,
wait, a turkey baster is generally used for fertility.
Look,
so what is it used for in this situation? Like,
kinda.
Maybe they were just making Thanksgiving in the bedroom. Like, I don't know how.
Oh.
Look, here's the good news. Podcast audience tolerances are generally high, and also my parents are dead. So I feel entitled to say this.
Yeah.
It was in my dad's drawer underneath sweaters. I don't know why it was in my dad's drawer. That begs lots of other questions. But it was a large, like beige object or something, and it looked like a turkey baster. That's what I associated with.
It sounds like a penis enlargement machine.
For sure.
That could, maybe it wasn't a dildo. Maybe it was a penis enlargement machine.
Like a pump.
Either way, it was a lot to hold.
That question. Genetically, you probably follow your father's. What was it? A penis enlarger or what? You don't actually. We're getting right real. We don't even know anything about this podcast, and we're getting right into penis size here. I'm having a little fun with the word snoop. Obviously, you don't snoop. You solicit that's right. The moments of vulnerability from people's childhood. And early on, while I was listening to this podcast, I was like, these people are. I was like, I'm on to these guys. They're getting performers. They're getting people are reaching out to Dave and Neil who have a history of perform. Like everyone is so good on stage that I was like, I'm pretty sure these are plants. These are people that have some experience on stage. And then really early on, I heard Colin's story. Let's listen to a little bit of Colin's story real quick.
Dear Jessica, before I start this letter, I want you to know that this letter and everything said in it is completely and truly confidential. I like you, Jessica. I am awed by your beauty and friendliness. In my eyes, I believe you're the most cheerful and friendliest girl in our school. My troubles and worries fade away for a moment whenever you smile at me or pass my way. Thank you for being so friendly to me and everybody. Your beauty of your radiance dominates my every waking moment.
Dominates my only something a child would say. Only it's such a like what's the most powerful thing that I could say? Colin, you listen to him and he's overcoming not only speaking in public, he talks about this speech impediment, which you hear him fighting against while he's delivering his very emotional sort of testimonial, his diary entry. And you're like, oh my God, these are real people still dealing with some very real things. Could you talk a bit about Colin coming to you and wanting to share and open up his story?
So the way Mortified works is I should back up and say that prior to the podcast, Mortified started as a live event where people get on stage and share their embarrassing journals and childhood writings in front of a live audience. And so Colin is actually part of our Portland chapter. He was a participant who performed in Portland reading letters and journal entries that he wrote when he was in middle school or high school. And so for him, it was really an act of bravery to get on stage. I can't imagine trying to get on stage and having to like read journal entries like verbatim like that with a speech impediment. he spent weeks, like unlike other people who get on stage in our show. And I should back up and say that every person who gets on stage, we work really hard with them to figure out what they're going to share. And we help them, we prepare them to actually get on the stage. So they're not necessarily reading cold, like it's not an open mic where they just show up, open up their journal and hope something is interesting to a group of strangers.
Yeah.
But what makes Colin different and really interesting is that he spent weeks memorizing and reading, like reading his entries over and over again in front of a mirror, because he was so afraid that his speech impediment would stop him from being able to get all the way through the piece. And because sometimes when he gets caught on a word, he might be caught on that word for a while. Like the longer he's caught, the harder it is for him to sort of get out of that.
Yeah.
Get out of that because it brings up all of his nerves. So, he really had to overcome a lot to get on stage. And so I was always in awe of everything he did.
It's a great episode to start with, guys. It's episode 35 if you're interested in hearing Colin's story. And thank you for setting the table there for me, Neil. I, a lot of times, have been interviewing podcasts that have like 7 or 8 episodes, are new or interesting and people don't really know about. And it's about focusing the light on these new and interesting ones. And I'm assuming that audiences are bringing a little more to the table with this one. Mortified, you guys have been doing the stage shows for 17 years. They're in over 20 states. They're international. I mean, the Mortified brand is out there. So this is more about just like, hey, if this isn't in your library, it should be required listening. This is a good podcast for all of us, especially right now. I've had a good time just listening to it to be reminded of a simpler time when problems were, seemed so big, but were actually not, When my biggest problem was, who am I going to date? It was really nice.
But one of the fun things for me about the show is that, we do, I think as adults, we think about the past as simpler times and all that kind of thing. And in some ways it is, but, I do think it's always really important to remember, like, to these kids, these are huge problems with huge stakes. They haven't lived the amount of years we've lived, so they don't know that these things don't kill us. They don't know that these things ultimately don't matter in certain ways. And so we actually try to approach the show with with reverence for that these are complex things and that these are big things, even though to us in some ways they're not, like getting rejected for prom or something.
You made a pretty big discovery out of that process, out of the Mortified method, right, David? Do you want to speak to that about, it just being it?
Sure.
There are clues to these passages, to what kids are writing about.
Basically, the sort of artifacts of our past, the excerpts that you don't think are that interesting or meaningful, I should say, even if you do find them interesting. That is to say, your old poems, your diary entries, even a song lyric, or even honestly just a photograph of you from when you were like 14. That we think of these things as fun, fluffy nostalgia, but when you look at them in the right way and you ask the right questions about them, like, what did this kid want? Why did that kid want it? And things of that nature, stories start to unfold, and these things become teen angst tea leaves that reveal so much about who that kid is, but also who that kid is going to become. So knowing anything that you could know about Zack, which I know very few things about you, Zack, but I know you are a good public speaker. I know you apparently like books in the background, and
these are fake. This is a Zoom.
They're fake.
Great
books. Oh yeah, because we're seeing each other on Zoom.
This is a virtual. Yeah,
and he doesn't like using his mugs for like drinking.
Right,
no,
he doesn't like that.
Display mugs. No.
And I learned in our pre-interview that you cut your own hair. So there's there might be things by looking at your childhood artifacts that we could learn about, like his level of comfort with certain things or his interests in certain things. And like, for instance, you work in advertising typically. Is that correct?
Yeah. I work in advertising. I'm an actor, so I do commercials and voiceovers.
Right.
So yeah, I work in advertising indirectly.
So there might be. So that means like you have a knack for communication, you have a knack for sales and creativity on both of those fronts, and the seeds of that you will see pretty quickly when you start looking at even just seemingly innocuous things that are not about that.
There's a pretty clear example of that sort of childhood, link from the childhood to who we are in the Tengwar episode. That's episode 148. Where let's listen to a bit of Tengwar, and then we'll discuss.
So there was no one that I could confide in at home, nobody, and so a diary seemed like the natural thing. But I didn't want anyone to find out about it, and so the obvious thing to do was to write a code.
Enter J.R.R. Tolkien.
Light bulb went off in my head, literally saying I'm going to write a diary in Tengwar. In Elvish, no one can read it. It'll be totally mine forever.
So he wrote and wrote for an entire year.
I think in total I wrote 30 or 40 entries in Tengwar. One page probably takes an hour to write it. Yeah, it probably takes an hour to write. It's taken me all day to decode 2 pages. 5 April to Saturday, 1981 AD. I guess AD is important. Melanie, all year I have been totally confused whether to love her or let her go. My mind told me I should wait until I had some money. My heart told me, don't let go. We were holding hands yesterday. That was a whole page, by the way.
So this gentleman, he to disguise his diary, writes and codes it in Tengwar, and he will grow up to be like doesn't he do that now? He's a coder, right? In
Yep.
life, we later find out. And I think
Exactly.
it's a really nice example of that sort of phenomenon that you're talking about, that when we do go back, you will find breadcrumbs of who you are now. You'll find the seeds often planted of who people are now.
Yeah, and if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, that winds up being a really fun episode.
Oh, great episode. 148, if anybody's interested in the Tengwar episode.
One of the other interesting things that comes out of working with folks is that unless there are some people that come to us and have a very good grasp on what is interesting about their own lives or their own childhoods. But a lot of times people don't necessarily know what is interesting about their own lives, about what's going on. Like they think there'll be lots of things in their journals or things that they wrote that they just go, oh yeah, that's nothing. And they'll just sort of put it aside, and we'll be like, no, you need to read that. You need to share that. And then they'll share that thing with us. And then we'll be able to expose certain things about their personality that is actually unique to them. And that's sort of the thing that it makes the show universal, is those very unique sort of quirks that we all have. The more specific we get in someone's personality, the more universal their story becomes. It's not the other way around where oh, I had a crush too. That means my story is universal. Well, everybody's had a crush on someone in their life, but people really just don't have a grasp on what makes them fascinating.
And probably want to conceal it, probably want to hide it away, subconsciously don't want to reveal that thing, and might take some prying on your part. What is that room like? It's like we hear the finished product, we hear them on stage, after some talking to and some coaching. But if you want, I'd like to hear more about that room when folks come to you in a very raw state and they have this diary entry and they're dealing with life and death and sex and these big things, and it's just you in this room with them and their emotions. What's that?
It starts with tension of almost like an audition or a casting session, because they come in with a preconceived sense of I have to impress these people.
Yeah.
The people who come to us with their journals, but rather quickly, it somehow eventually turns into a group therapy session. It's healing, not just for them sometimes to share things in their life that maybe they've never shared with anyone, let alone a couple people they met 7 minutes ago.
Right.
But also it's healing for us, because the nature of someone you don't know sharing personal stuff with you is really cathartic. And it's one of my favorite parts of the process, is getting to meet people and having them, without knowing them, opening up their journals and just start sharing something from their childhood, something that they thought was so personal that they could only keep it in their private diary. And now here they are sharing it with us.
Did you have to take any sort of guidance counselor class or anything to deal with people are coming to you with some baggage?
Very unprofessional.
But you're just good listeners, because you do we learned something throughout the course of the pod. You guys that haven't heard it, you'll hear, the podcast is based on the live show, but then Neil and David also catch up with those performers, and there's a bit of a post-mortem and oftentimes a preamble to expand on the world of the story. And you're not just putting these people on display. Often we're learning something about their journey and learning something from their story. But you guys you're digging, you're digging through some stuff, some repressed stuff, some stuff that people haven't, dealt with since they were kids. And I'm wondering how you how you so deftly navigate those tricky waters.
Well, I think that the goal of kind of doing all that digging really is it's less about like that people should know about this person's life. It's more when you just hear, take a person who's obsessed with Lord of the Rings. That is not something I grew up being obsessed with, but I did grow up being obsessed with other things. And so when I can hear, and that particular clip you played deals with shame, and it deals with other darker things that eventually it stops being funny and starts getting pretty heavy. And whatever is underneath those surface things is, I think, what we're always just trying to get at, because then that's how anybody else is going to relate. That's how somebody in Tulsa is going to relate to somebody in New York City, despite growing up in very different types of places. We have a show on Netflix, a miniseries called The Mortified Guide, and one of the episodes features the song lyrics written by this kid who grew up in Puerto Rico, and it's all in Spanish, and then he translates it. And on many, many levels, you would think it would be relatable to people from that specific situation. And it's not at all. So that, everything comes out through interview and through just little bits of context.
Sure, and also multi-generational binding here from your podcast. You hear from people whose adolescence hadn't happened since 1941, and oftentimes their experience is very similar to something that a tween is going through right now. You really learn from this podcast that we are all connected and we all do have the same shared experience. And generally everybody thinks they were picked on in high school. That's what we all can identify with. No one really thinks they had it like aces throughout.
That's one of our cliches that we'll sometimes make fun of. We might get somebody saying something about, they get on stage and they say, so growing up, I was a total nerd. Yeah, and sometimes we will keep that in. But very often we will cut that out because we're like, not everybody can claim that or say that.
Yeah.
There's nothing more upsetting to someone who was a nerd, like legitimately inescapably nerdy.
Headgear.
When someone like gets on stage and they look like they could be like, on the cover of a magazine, and they're like, I was a total nerd. And you're like, like, there's,
nerddom and geekdom in general has been co-opted by just like passion for some reason, within like the last 10 or 15 years. It's like, no, you're not a tech nerd. You're just a really smart guy. Or you're not a Princess Bride nerd. You really like the movie and it's fine.
Well, yeah. Star Wars is the #1 movie of all time by manyfold. And for that to ever get credit as being nerdy is just bizarre.
You're mainstream, bro. You're mainstream.
But I will say that one of the things that, to get back to your other point before, one of the things that like became clear in sort of working with different people over the years who like had vastly different experiences in high school, whether they were the captain of the football team or like they were the kid who was shy and getting picked on, is that like every kid has like the worst moment of their childhood. Sometimes that's like legitimately something we could all agree on. It was a really terrible moment. And for other kids, that like worst moment might be something that almost feels like innocuous. But the way that those two kids may have felt in those worst moments are almost identical. Like whatever your worst moment is, you're going to feel the same way no matter what. Like you're going to feel terrible no matter
what. It's all relative. Your problems are your problems. Yeah.
You're always able to relate to whatever someone's going through, no matter how bad it was. So
has anybody ever come to you with that moment and either of you been like, maybe we shouldn't share this? This is someone saw a murder and probably maybe you want to keep that off the stage for now. But
I think one of the things that we are very careful with isn't so much like it's not so much about like what the event was, but it's like what is that person's relationship to the thing that happened to them? Where are
Hmm.
they at with it? Are they over it enough where they could get on a stage in essentially a comedy show and feel like they could share that and feel like it's okay for other people to laugh?
God, is there enough distance between the
Yeah.
thing?
And so
Got
we're
it.
protective of people. If we feel like they're not there,
Got
we
it.
don't want to subject them to that
No. And
situation.
how do you let them down? How do you break up? How do you let them know this probably isn't right?
We have a very, very, very good line for rejection.
Yeah.
Which is, and first of all, no one has ever rejected from Mortified. They just haven't been cast yet.
Nice. Okay.
We haven't found enough minutes yet. And I say that because it's actually also true. Like if we met with you and we only found 2 minutes of funny stuff, we probably can't put you on stage. There's sort of some chances we could, but for the most part we can't. And so we're like, well, if we could find 7 more minutes, please keep digging, and we'll give them tips for how to dig and all that stuff. But we'll give them things to look for. And if we feel that they're too close, if they are, let's say they're 22 years old, they're on the younger side of our participants, and the material they're giving us is from when they were 18, I don't want that in the show. But if they're 22 and they give me something from when they were 10, that's totally fair game. And
how is it organized? Like, if you are acquiring all of this, what does the shame bank look like? Is it by person? Is it by event? Because you're aggregating these and thematically putting together shows from 17 years of live shows. So what is that library like? I'm curious.
Insane.
There's quite a lot of diary entries lodged in my head.
Yeah. Is it by
moment.
like mom issues, dad issues, camp things? Like, how do you physically go through all of this material?
It's a good question because it's something that we always still wrestle with.
Wow.
Because no matter how you catalog all the material, like with keywords and different things like that, I'm always searching for something so specific every week. Like if 2 things come up out of like hundreds of stories, I'm always like, well, that's not the right word.
Let's walk them through an example of that with either the episode that's coming out this weekend or one that you're searching for right now that we're trying, like a theme. So we start with a theme like breakups, which is a pretty generic theme, but and then we search in our search engine of audio. We have a bunch of audio that's been tagged with keywords by interns or us, and like each performance might be like, this is Zack's performance, and he talks about mothers and anger issues and Christmas, and there's a letter to John Travolta in there, and like we hopefully, if it's been logged well, it'll say all those things.
Well, so we have an episode about to come out, which I'm really excited about because it's really fun. So sort of, we've been doing a lot of episodes more recently that are sort of inspired by current events. So like we're all many of us are still mostly stuck in our homes. We've been stuck in our homes for months. And then also there's been lots, there's also Black Lives Matter movement and all the protests. So there's been a lot going on that's been really on the front of people's minds. And it's for us in some ways, like being stuck in your home a lot specifically is actually something that teenagers and kids know very well because they spend a lot of time in their childhood stuck in their house or in their room. And so in some ways it's been great creatively for us, but it's allowed us to do episodes, creatively approach lots of themes in new ways. So like we have an episode coming out all about pen pals, but the concept behind pen pals is actually, we're in this period where we're all on Zoom calls or, FaceTiming, and we're not really getting to necessarily be with the people that we emotionally rely on the most. And given that, I thought, wouldn't it be great to do an episode about the idea of kids writing letters to people because whatever support they need, they're not getting it in their home or in their life, in their direct surroundings. And it just feels very relevant to what we're all going through right now. It's one of those episodes that makes you laugh, but also may give you the feels a little bit.
Most do. And I do appreciate the amount of support that comes from Mortified Podcast. You guys usually like to find a cause or something to support, no matter what the issue is that you guys are discussing. You find the organization or the support group out there to help folks deal with whatever the topic that you're covering is, which we appreciate for sure. I mean, that must take a whole other extra human to find those resources for you. How big is your staff at Mortified?
The core team is 3 people.
For the podcast.
The core podcast is the 2 that you're speaking to, and Hadley Dion, who's
Hadley, we hear a lot.
she's an amazing producer. Sometimes she is a voice on the podcast.
So you guys are just freak workaholics. You're in 20 cities. You're overseas. There's a game. There is
Right.
Epcot ride, Mortified
There's
ride.
an Epcot ride. Yes,
There is cereal. Like you guys are.
Well,
how do you
so-
do that? Just the 3 of you? It's
The,
not,
the
Well, here,
cereal that
this is
makes
a-
you feel terrible in the morning.
it's just filled with shame. Don't start your day with that cereal. You're just going to be crying from there.
Mortiflakes,
Flakes.
Shamos.
Let's take a quick break. Guys, we want you to think of us as your personal podcast curator. And if you like the show, please check us out and subscribe. Visit thepodspotter.com and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at thepodspotter for lots of good stuff. And please leave a review, subscribe, rate, judge us on Apple Podcasts, and help spread the word. We release every Monday with a breakdown of great new pod, and we're just going to keep plowing ahead here, so please keep listening. If you have any suggestions for future pods that you love, pods that you think we should feature, please drop us a note on any social media platform or at thepodspotter.com. Thanks, everybody.
We are actually right now working on a second podcast, and it's a really great show. It's for tweens. It's called Ooh, You're in Trouble. And it's all about kids breaking rules and kind of getting mixed up in sort of, violating whatever they're told to do. They're doing the opposite.
And what is the game called?
Oh, and then we also have a game. We're on Zoom, so I'm going to show it to you, but I'll explain it to the audience.
Ooh.
It's called I Can't Believe I Did That. It comes out September 29th in America. I don't know if it'll be available beyond in Canada or so.
And
But
what's the game about, Dave?
Yeah.
the game is kind of like Mortified meets Cards Against Humanity. It's a game where you and your friends are prompted to share hilarious and embarrassing stories about your past, and the person with the most unforgettable story wins.
Oh,
And
we like
so-
games. We like games on this podcast.
Well,
And
hey,
so if you
I
want to pick this
actually
bad
have
boy
some-
open,
I have some cards I can ask you.
Ooh.
I can ask you some sample questions.
I'm just the host. I don't participate.
Oh no, you're the only one who's allowed to answer.
I'm the only one, right? Yeah.
Let's. I have 3 cards in my hand. Now I do. I'd like you to tell me. Pick
Oh,
1,
boy.
2, or
Oh boy.
card 1, 2, or 3. This is going to be like let's make a deal here.
Let's do that one that wants to get away. The one that wants to jump. Let's do that one. He wants to play the most. Yep. Far your right hand.
Okay. So this card says, "Tell me a moment when
Uh-oh.
you were a bit of a stalker.
Bit of a
Biggest creeper wins." And so you and your friends would be answering this question in a group. If you don't have an answer to this one, you would just sit out the round. But I trust Zack. I know you
Yeah.
well enough in these 30 minutes that once upon a time you were obsessively stalking something or
I'm
someone.
going to have to think on this one. Neil, do you have anything that jumps out at you as
That
a
was my
stalker?
entire childhood. I'd have to pick one. That's the problem.
We should mention, Neil, this might be a good time to talk about your offerings, your poetry offerings when you participate in.
There's a few that would fit just in that. So my Mortified piece, the thing I share on stage, is a collection of poetry and love letters that I never actually sent, thank God, to girls. And I was a very desperate child. And so there is one love letter that I wrote to a girl when I was working at the state park. I was in my late high school life, or maybe yet towards the ends of high school. And so I was old enough to know not to do this, but there was this girl who also worked at the park, and her job was to go out into the park and just basically pick up garbage, like with the stake, like
Sure.
drive it through and put it in and I worked at the concession stands, and she would come by sometimes.
Was she in juvie, or she just did this?
That is, I think, juvie.
Yeah.
No one has ever asked that question before, and very astute question.
I'm pretty sure possibly, but
Okay. That's not a job. That's a punishment.
those were the kind of girls that I was really attracted to at that age.
Oh, okay. Now we're revealing something about you. Got
So
it.
I really
Bad
like girls that seemed like they'd
Sharp
been
object.
through something.
Got it.
And so she would come by this concession stand that I worked at, and maybe I had a conversation in total. Maybe I'd spoken to her for a grand total of like 3 minutes in my life.
Hmm.
But I somehow knew her name enough that I decided that I was madly in love with her, and I was going to express my deepest feelings for her in a love letter.
Perfect.
And it is a very overdramatic love letter. If you happen to have a clip of that, you can play it, but it is
We can find it.
amazingly melodramatic considering how little I knew her.
I bet you know some of it off the top of your head.
I do, but so much so I could, so much so that I will just say this, that when I found this letter years later,
Mhm.
and I saw the name at the top, which was Andrea, I was like, Andrea, I never liked a girl named Andrea. It took me forever to remember who this person was. And I finally remembered it because I found the next note. There was a note after the letter. So I wrote this love letter. I was planned to give this girl this love letter. And then when I went to give it to her, she was like walking with this very good looking, like guy with a 6-pack.
Yeah.
Yep.
Competition.
And so I was so upset that I went home and then wrote this note of defeat on the back of on the back of that poem. And then I eventually pieced together like, that's who Andrea is.
Yeah. Well, also revealing that story, you share that you share some of your poetry, and that leads to an even bigger story. You share your poetry at one of the lives, right? And then your now wife was in attendance at the audience. Is this right? Am I
Yes.
doing my homework correctly?
So
This is a
and
crazy story.
I will just back up and say we recently shared some audio of me reading that Andrea letter. Dave, I don't know if you know what episode it was. It was like from the last 2 or 3 episodes, I feel like. We used it as a cold open in one of our recent episodes. And so the audio that we used in that episode is me reading that letter at a live show at Mortified in San Francisco back in 2006. And sitting in the audience of that show, and I didn't know her yet, and she's probably like laughing on the audio, like in the audience, is what became this woman who then came up to me after the show, really connected to how terrible my poetry was and how
Stalker poem. Yeah.
Yes, how desperate I was and how horrible of a writer I was, and basically introduced herself to me. And lo and behold, over the course of, the next little while, we started hanging out and fell in love and got married.
This is only the tip of the iceberg of my feelings for you. But do not fear, because I will respect and treat you like the Queen of England.
The other part that happened was that eventually she shared her own poetry with me and things that she wrote when she was a kid. And her poetry is just as equally as horrific as mine is in a very similar way. And so at our wedding, we actually had our parents, like, normally at weddings, there's a moment where somebody comes up and they read some amazing poem by some poet, and everyone's like, that's the most beautiful thing about love I've ever heard.
Yeah.
In our wedding, we had our
gotta go Corinthians.
Exactly. And in our wedding,
love is blind.
In our wedding, those poems were our childhood poems that our parents read.
Mortifying. So, and you, I just find it's so beautiful that you found your now wife, your family was born out of this Mortified podcast, which got its start the other side, and the other sort of spectrum with Leslie. Isn't that right, David?
Yeah.
The Leslie story is now famous, and the whole thing started from rejection. It's almost as though David's path had to happen in order for Neil to find love in a weird way. David, do you want to share the Leslie story?
Basically, I wrote a love letter to a girl. I never gave it to that girl. I found that letter years later in my adulthood and shared it with friends, and that's what sparked Mortified. That's the quick version of it.
Yeah.
The letter is very pretentious and begins like this. Hello, Leslie. Again, I did not know. This is like Neil had Andrea, right? I did not know Leslie. I maybe had spoken to her twice when I was a writer for the school paper. I made up excuses to interview her. But anyway, so I was going to give her this letter that began, "Hello, Leslie. How is your day today? Mine's quite well, I must admit. I do hope that your day is a good one, because what you're about to read may or may not add an extra color to the rainbow at day's end." So I was trying very hard to impress this
That's
person.
Beautiful, David.
Yes. That's how I spoke all the time too. That was just very, very normal, casual conversation.
It was 1600 when that letter.
Yeah. Yep.
And that was the letter that launched 1,000 shame stories. The letter to Leslie. Has Leslie reached out? Has she?
So fun fact, Leslie probably does not know that she has started Mortified. She doesn't know who I am, as far as I know. It is possible that Leslie has heard of Mortified. It's also possible that she has attended Mortified or listened to the Mortified podcast. It's possible, but had no idea that she created it.
Wow. Leslie doesn't know. Is her name Leslie? Or is that a fake?
Yep.
Okay.
No. Her first name is Leslie, and that's all. But she doesn't have a last name. She's just like Cher.
Well,
and
speaking of Cher, I have been racking my brain and trying to think of a stalker story, and I can't find one to share because I was just very I was just very persistent. I would just I don't know. I guess persistence and stalkery, there's a fine line there, but I will share. This is very stalkery. When I was 10, and I was going to probably share this later as my we do a segment on our show called Go Ahead, No One's Listening, where we reveal a secret or tell off a former boss. And I'm just going to go ahead and share mine because it definitely is stalkery. When I was 10, I went through a bit of a peeping Tom phase. Had the binoculars, for the baseball game right by the bed, and the neighbors right across the street, maybe every night with lights on, would participate in acrobatics. And so I'd just pull up the old binoculars, and just 10-year-old me would be like, what are they doing tonight? This is crazy. And that legally frowned upon and very dangerous and stupid, can definitely be considered as stalkery for sure. And luckily I'd never been, I never got caught. And until this moment, sharing it with you guys.
I'm pretty damn sure if we were to vote right now on who won that round of I Can't Believe I Did That, Zack would easily win.
Stalker.
Not all the questions in the game are as intense as that. I probably should have just given you 3 or 4 cards and just said to pick one. But there are other questions where it's like, tell me a moment when you made a daring fashion choice growing up, or
did you give yours, David? Did you give your stalker story? Because you could still.
Oh, I didn't know. Well, technically, Mortified, the love letter that started Mortified is that.
That's pretty good.
Mortified is based on obsessing over a stranger.
Oh wow, beautiful.
Yeah. A stranger who I thought would change my life because maybe I'd get married to her and the whole thing, and she's going to be my first girlfriend, and the fun twist is she did change my life.
Well, I'm happy to have won your game, but I'd like to give you now a game that you could win because we play for some pretty high stakes around here at the Pod Spotter.
Nice segue.
Yeah. Well, you've already noticed my mugs, and these are all previous podcasts that have been on the pod, and they've answered their trivia questions correctly on a segment called "How Well Do You Know Your Baby?" Answer 2 of these 3 questions correctly about your baby, and we will proudly display some pod swag. The Mortified podcast right here. I have some pod swag. Look at that. That's the Mortified flask, Mortified podcast flask. Selling in stores.
Drink your troubles away.
That's it. To reveal your story of shame and embarrassment and snooping and peeping And so this is where it could live in perpetuity should you get these answers correctly. I'm going to play for you 3 clips from your pod, and let's see if you can remember these human contributors to your pod. These mortifies? These mortif... What do you...
Sure.
Okay. Mortifiles. I have 3 mortifiles for you.
As long as you don't ask us to name the actual episode, that I know we will fail at.
No. Just talk about it and then extrapolate on it if you so choose. Let's get to the first one. Here's sound cue number 1. Can you remember this mortifile?
All right, so this is a high school play. Let's just get started right there. This is a high school play, and they ran a full-page review of this play. I mean, right away, it looks great. Until you read the title of the review. If the butler did it, he should have been fired. Yeah, the city paper sent a full-on professional reviewer to see a bunch of 15-year-olds and just really lay into them.
I love that one. Go ahead. Who's the mortifile?
Do you want to say it, Dave? This one we got easily.
Sure, you go.
You got it instantly.
Will Seymour.
Oh, it's so good. This episode's so fun to listen to Will and his journey trying to escape bullies.
He is actually in our brand new episode that I don't know when this is coming out, but episode, the Pen Pals episode, which is going to be episode number something, 195 maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
195.
195.
That will, he appears once again in that episode.
Beautiful. That's 119, Will Seymour's journey of escaping bullies, only to find them at the local newspaper. Let's play sound cue number 2.
DD, Dear Diary. Hi, today is November 21st, 1995. I got my period today. And you know what's weird? Today's my mom's birthday.
Can you name either the episode or the contributor?
I don't think Dave can do it, but I think I know.
Oh,
So I want to give him the opportunity first, or I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot, Dave.
You are, but I know the voice. I'm not placing the name, but I have a few names in my head that I'm not gonna go for him. But I think it's from the. I actually think it's from the period episode.
I think it's Aaron Drew, but I don't know for certain.
ding,
if
ding,
it
ding,
is.
ding, ding. 2 out of 3. There it is. Aaron Drew, Confessions of a Catholic Schoolgirl. Being a Catholic school boy, I think I jumped on this episode first. It's a really funny one. You listen to Aaron be
She's
very
great.
candid
She's
about.
very funny.
So good. Is she a performer? Is she an entertainer? Everybody's so
She
good.
is not. She's actually not.
Terrific.
She lives in I think she's a part of our Washington, D.C. Chapter.
All you Catholic school kids, start at 151. That's a good place to begin digesting this pod. Guys, you already got it. Let's go for a clean sweep here. 3 out of 3. And the flask is a top shelf flask. Top shelf pod. It's going up. Mortified forever. But let's hear, this is sound cue number 3, just for kicks. How well do you know your baby?
I have some of the qualities that would make me quite a good actress. If there are any parts in any new animated Disney features to come that require a young teenage girl's voice, I'm available. I have a very good singing voice, which could be helpful, and my speaking voice is very attractive from what I hear from people all around me.
Who is the mortifile?
That one I got nothing on.
I know the exact piece this is, and I'm blanking on her name, but it is an episode where she writes a letter to Disney about where it starts off where she's upset that there's not enough representation about
It's in our
from
Princess
Asian Americans.
episode.
Nice.
And eventually it turns into you should cast me
Yeah.
as the next Disney princess.
That is Jane Coe and I'm No Princess, episode
Yes.
142. Another very funny contribution from a very funny mortifile. Guys, you did it. 2 out of 3. You know your baby very well.
2 out of 3 is not good.
Congratulations. You've talked about 195 coming up. That means 200 is right around the corner. Have you put any thought to episode 200? For 100, the mortifiles went in-house and they turned the mirror on the staff. You all contributed something personal. What do you have in store for 200?
We were just going to have you on and just talk to you for 200
Talk about
minutes.
Peeping Toms and being a horrible 10-year-old. And okay, perfect.
No, we actually
We should do 200 minutes or 200 seconds of just people saying, "Dear Diary, Dear Journal, Dear DD."
You probably could. My goodness, there's so much.
We haven't given it. We haven't given it a ton of thought yet.
Yeah, you got some time.
The only thing we've kind of spoken about is actually, if you do listen to our 100th episode, there is a woman at the beginning of that episode who is 99 years old. She was turning 100 at that time. She is still alive. She's 103 and recently contracted COVID and went into hospice. And I am saying this with an upbeat voice because she recovered from COVID, is exiting hospice and just celebrated, I think, birthday 104 last, like 3 days ago. Wow. And so I think we are going to air, what I'd like to do is air a extended version of that original interview and celebrate the life of Celeste, because holy shit.
Wow. Well done.
Yeah.
Cheating death.
So
Celeste. That's great for Celeste. I can't wait to hear that. Are there any, do you have little, like, with all of this, are there little nuggets that you just don't know where they go yet? Where, like, I mean, obviously you have a ton.
Yeah.
That, but can you tease anything coming up, anything else coming up that is just like, I have this awesome piece of audio. I don't know where it goes, but I know that it needs to be heard.
Several years in the making. We have an episode that is daring to come out soon. It is like 80% done.
Oh, wow.
It is a fascinating story of a man named John who locked himself away in his bedroom in the early 1980s, in the 70s, and even a little bit in the 60s, and basically gets obsessed with television and writes it doesn't make sense, but he writes an imaginary, he pretends to be a network president of a TV network and basically writes memos and corporate documents for this imaginary TV network that exists to save all the shows that he loves from being canceled.
Oh, wow.
It makes no sense, but that's why it's fit.
Is he at all successful? Did he get any?
He actually became, Neil,
a TV critic.
Wow. The Mortified
TV
method
critic.
once again at work.
Yep.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. So what can you, we're almost at time here. I won't keep you any longer, but I do have to, I have to see if I can get anything from you as the proud father of a now 7-month-old baby girl. I've been thinking, thank you very much. I've been thinking a lot about how to better equip myself with dealing with shame and dealing with these big, heavy issues with my daughter will inevitably, have to go through, and she's going to feel like the first person ever going through these things. What have you learned about shame and about, tweens, and just how to guide? You're a father, Neil, how to guide these young people through these troubled waters?
The best thing I can tell you is that at the same time your daughter will be going through things for the first time, you will be too, as being a first-time parent. And you will just know that you're not alone in being sometimes being in many situations that you do not know how to handle, and you will not handle it correctly in the moment, but you can always correct it. I mean, that's what therapy's for.
Sure. Or that's what Mortified's for. You know? I'll just create more. She'll create more content for you guys.
The hardest part for me is because I have this weird lens of seeing Henry's childhood through. Like I kind of see it as this very long Mortified piece that I have a hard time. Like when something happens to him, I have a hard time containing my laughter in the moment. Yeah. Because I'm just sort of seeing it as like it's happening in real time. I can't believe he's doing and saying this.
Yeah.
So like years and years ago, when he was in preschool, he started, I don't know why he started thinking about sex for some reason, but I remember on the car ride to school one morning, he was like, how does a man take his penis off to go inside of a woman?
Turkey baster.
Clearly. And I just thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever heard, and immediately told everyone about it, and did not try to correct it entirely.
Yeah. It's so funny how these moments, these discoveries, these sayings, these mortified moments, the thing that you are terrified most of, the thing that you're most passionate about are the defining moments of our lives. And it's just so funny, thinking about rejection and thinking about, all of these moments of frustration. We've been taught poorly, we haven't been instructed properly, I think, in how to deal with these moments. These are the moments that define who we are. And so what is seemingly a disaster like Leslie could lead to something like Mortified. And, I'm just thinking a lot about this lately. We just did a Dead Eyes podcast about Connor Ratcliffe, who was fired from a TV show and then started a podcast, and now a very successful podcast based around being fired from that TV show. These moments in our lives of rejection are badges of honor. They're medals. They should be celebrated as much as they should be run from. Yes, would you agree?
I think failure and rejections and mistakes are, they're all just weapons for us. They're all just sort of, they're all just fuel for us to make us better people. And I think we have an unhealthy relationship with shame in this culture, and that basically makes us feel bad about all those things. And we're right to feel bad about those things. And I'm not somebody who believes in the eradication of shame, but I do think we spend too much time focusing on making people feel bad about these mess ups. And it feels pretty good to celebrate them, because then you realize, like, oh yeah, I did that too.
Have you found that shame is pretty much universal amongst the sexes? You have I think that there's the misconception that girls experience it and differently, and that boys will manifest it in ways of like acting out and frustration. Girls will go inward and write more in their diaries, but you guys have a really good cross section of guys and gals. Is that deliberate, or do you think that everyone experiences the sexes sort of experience shame evenly?
Well, I mean, our show is a little bit skewed towards not just who experiences something, because that is everybody.
Yeah.
It's who wrote something about it, and then who saved that for a decade at least.
Yeah.
And that does tend to be women.
Yeah.
That also tends to be white women. And but everybody does experience all of those things.
Yeah. We don't always just write them down and keep them for 20 years.
Yeah.
Got it. Anything else to plug, gentlemen? Anything else coming up? Anything? Cereals, Morty Flakes, anything?
I think the best thing to tell people is if they're interested in Mortified, if they think this sounds fun, if this sounds interesting, they should go to our website, which is getmortified.com. And we would, our game, which is not called Mortified, so that's a little confusing, but our game, you can find out about it at getmortified.com/game, but you can buy it right now on Amazon, even if you're hearing this before September 29th, because it's available for pre-order.
For now, you have a nice bank of material to last you for a while. Yeah.
We have a nice bank to last us for a while, and we're hard at work on the Ooh, You're in Trouble podcast at the same time, and working on releasing the I Can't Believe I Did That game. So
you know what? We've all shared so much here today. Can I just share my absolute favorite piece of audio? And
sure.
Then
Yeah.
I just love the band Sylvan Esso, and I couldn't believe Amelia Meath stopped by and she gave you the original two songs that she worked on, the very first lyrics she ever sort of thought up.
And it was beautiful, right?
Amazing. I've listened to so many interviews with her. I've never heard her talk about these lyrics or do these before. And I just thought it's an amazing piece of audio. And so we'll leave with this moment of mortification. And thank you, gentlemen, for stopping by and sharing your baby with us, because we've loved it here at the Pot Spotter.
Cool. Thanks for having us. It's been really fun.
My two first songs was just a hook, which is called I Don't Want to Be Arm Candy, which I wrote when I was 8. I don't want to be arm candy. But there were no other words. It was just my first hook. And I was like, I did it. I'm good. I'm 8. I'm done. That was in reaction to getting the tiniest weird beginnings of breasts. Just connected right from like half nipple boobs to feminism. That was where I went. And then the second song I ever wrote was also called I'll Be in the Kitchen, which it's a really mean song. The chorus was, I'll be in the kitchen, I'll be in the kitchen, oh, I'll be in the kitchen, I'll be in the kitchen, I'll be in the kitchen, and when you get the itching to do what you gotta do. I'll be in the kitchen when you get the itching to do what you gotta do.
That's kind of great, actually.
Thanks. I was happy with it.
This has been the Pod Spotter, where we showcase the pods that you need to know about. If you have one that you think we should know about, let us know via thepodspotter.com or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram at thepodspotter. Thank you. This has been Zack Robodos. The Pod Spotter is created by the Price Brothers, produced by Oink Inc. Radio, associate producer Tori Adams, and is recorded and produced at Baker Sound in Philadelphia.